Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 11th of March, 2020, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. Carnage.
It's absolute carnage, Brian. So the Bank of England has announced emergency measures to deal with coronavirus this morning. Let's just have a quick look at what Mark Carney had to say.
Good morning, everyone. The front lines of combating the challenges of COVID-19 comprises the extraordinary efforts of NHS professionals, carers, public health officials and volunteers across the country, as well as the exceptional efforts of the FCO to help UK citizens abroad. The Bank of England's role is to help UK businesses and households manage through an economic shock that could prove large and sharp, but should be temporary. That's why the bank is announcing today a comprehensive and timely package of measures to help UK households and businesses bridge across the economic disruption caused by COVID-19. Maximizing the effectiveness of our response requires coordination across all the bank's policy committees. That's why all policy committees are simultaneously acting today. Maximizing the effectiveness of our response requires working in concert with Her Majesty's Treasury. That's why we're acting on Budget Day, when the Chancellor will announce a series of government initiatives to support UK households and businesses. Following the spread of COVID-19, risky assets and commodity prices have fallen sharply, and government bond yields have reached all-time lows, consistent with a marked deterioration in risk appetite and in the outlooks for global and UK growth. Indicators of financial market uncertainty have reached extreme levels. Although the magnitude of the economic shock from coronavirus is highly uncertain, activity is likely to weaken materially in the UK over the coming months. Temporary but significant disruptions to supply chains and weaker activity could challenge cash flows and increase the demand for short-term credit from households and for working capital from companies.
So there you go, Brian. The banks will be all right. No problem there because they're going to lend. And of course, they're going to be earning interest on what they lend. That's fantastic stuff. But the fusion doctrine at work, coordinated action across the bank, all the various bank departments, coordinated action between the bank and the Treasury. So everything's coordinated. We're going to deal with this nasty coronavirus. So this is what they have announced, cutting interest rates to 0.25%, the lowest they have been in history. Taking borrowing costs down is going to be fantastic for everybody with a mortgage, really bad for everybody with savings. Well, they're going to lend, as we say. Now, for anybody that's in the slightest bit surprised about what Mark Carney has announced today, well, perhaps he shouldn't be, because, of course, we've seen this type of thing from Mark Carney before. No-deal Brexit would be the worst crash since 1930s. The Daily Telegraph accusing them of project hysteria. There were quite a few of these types of news conferences from Mark Carney all the way through Brexit, with the doom disaster and the world's about to blow up if Brexit happens. And of course, quick as a flash, none of what he predicted actually happened. But what we've got here is more sort of establishment underpinnings of the hysteria around coronavirus, Brian, because we've got to have this coordinated emergency action between all the various departments.
It's incredible, isn't it? And these people completely unaccountable to the public. They're there in the Bank of England. They are the money people. Are they accountable to the public in any proper way? No, they just get on and decide their policy behind closed doors. But one thing we can be sure about is if there's a disaster, if there's a war, they're going to make money out of it. So if they're lending money, they believe they can make money out of it. Absolutely.
Now, Goldman Sachs this morning, Brian, said that they're expecting the stock markets to collapse by another 15%. 15%, this is pretty huge. So that would see the end of this so-called bull market, which has lasted 11 years. This was in a research note that they pushed out this morning, and they're expecting that to happen by the summer. Well, it gets even better because, well, of course, today is Budget Day, and we're apparently levelling up the economy. So we're using this gaming term now to describe things, deep politics, but there you go. We're levelling up the economy. This, in fact, is a coronavirus budget. You're glad to know that. It's not a Brexit budget, it's a coronavirus budget. It's all about an economic response, bringing stability and security. We're going to get through this together. Coronavirus is the key issue facing us today. It's going to cause temporary disruption, but if the government does the right things, then that is only going to be temporary disruption, and it's not going to cause longer term damage to the economy. He's the Chancellor expecting a fifth of people to be off work at any one time. Supply chains are going to be affected. It's probably going to cause a recession, but it's a temporary problem, so don't worry about it, because people are not spending because they're following doctors' orders to stay at home.
It's just remarkable. We're going to have a look at some of the coronavirus statistics in a minute, because we've got qualified medical people so concerned at the hype that they say, have a look at what's really being said behind the scenes. But we had that report in the Daily Mail that 600,000 people were going to die in UK. So a fifth of the workforce off. We've got propaganda here absolutely driving the country into panic. The bank's going to make money off it, and the government's going to be able to restructure, level out the economy in the background.
Well, and one of the key things that he was talking about right at the beginning of the budget speech, which of course is happening right now, so we can't give you all the details of it, but he said that this was all about putting party politics aside in the name of the coronavirus. We've got to work across parties.
So we're going to get the coalition as well.
We've got the one-party state being built in front of us. Let's just briefly have a look at some of the other things that he's expected to talk about. £5 billion for gigabit broadband, fantastic. They're going to take on fly tippers, that's fantastic too. £8 million for new football pitches. Employment tax breaks for veterans, maybe that's the only really serious thing here. But of course, you got to ask why they're suddenly interested in veterans.
Because they want to keep them under control. They want to keep them quiet. They want to stop them speaking out about what's really going on in the military and the neglect of veterans. The government, I think, is very frightened of ex-military people, because if they were to properly organise themselves, of course, they could become a political force to be reckoned with. So you're going to do everything to bribe them, to buy them off.
Right. And also they're going to double funding for flood defences. We're not going to, bring back any of the land management policies that we've had in the past that prevented the flooding in the first place. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to spend money on better flood defences.
So it'd be interesting to see whether they've got money in this budget for Fairbourne, the town in Wales that was simply told by the local authority, we're going to abandon you, and the village, small town, is going to be decommissioned. I'd be interested to see where this money goes for flood defences.
It won't go there, that's for sure. Okay, so let's just briefly bring us up to date with the number of cases of coronavirus. 120,794 cases, 4,365 deaths so far. And the number that everybody says isn't being reported properly, which is the number of recoveries, currently 66,985. Just to put the number of deaths in perspective, on average, 9,000, 10,000 deaths from the flu every year in the UK, 600,000 deaths from the flu each year globally. 1.2 million deaths from TB globally, and we don't seem to be too worried about those things, but 4,365 deaths for the coronavirus, and we are destroying the global economy as we speak.
Destroying or restructuring?
Well, indeed. Now, this is not to say anything against the 4,365 people that have passed away so far. That's very sad, but the response does not seem proportionate to me.
No. Because there's another agenda going on, and I think some of our medical specialists are beginning to smell the fact that something is wrong.
But good news, Brian, because the government has announced that there's going to be extended scope for deliveries to supermarkets, so empty shelves may be a thing of the past, because at the moment there are limitations on what times of the day and the night deliveries can be made to supermarkets. Those are going to be loosened, and also the limitations on the amount of time that drivers are allowed to be driving for are going to be loosened in order to enable extended delivery times. But it's not so good news for the mainstream press because as coronavirus is climbing up the list of keywords for advertising, unfortunately, advertisers do not want to be associated with the word. So the more coronavirus material appearing in the mainstream press, the less advertising revenue they seem to be getting as a result. That's a shame.
Incredible. Well, we're very pleased to say that clearly professionals have got enough trust in the UK column to start sending us information about coronavirus. We had a package in this morning. We haven't had long to look at this material. We're very confident that the source that's provided it is extremely well qualified to put this information together. But let's run through this sequence of information and we can discuss it. I'm going to be very careful as this is animated, has been provided to us in an animated form, and I don't want to make any mistakes in bringing it on screen. So it might be a little bit slow, but it's just fascinating information. So let's have a look at the first one. And the whole point of this is it's a serious report, a government report. And what it's saying is that receiving influenza vaccination may increase the risk of other respiratory viruses, a phenomenon known as virus interference. It says a vaccine-derived virus interference was significantly associated with coronavirus and human metapneumovirus. So we've got something extremely interesting here. We've heard about this before, but basically in a simple analysis that if you keep giving people vaccines, you can actually put them at risk of other viruses which normally their bodies would be perfectly able to cope with. And of course, this is a topic not being discussed in the wider media. You certainly will not hear the BBC medical and science teams reporting about this effect because, of course, the BBC is simply pro the government line on vaccines. So just information there saying that it's even government sources, and this was with regard to Department of Defense. So this appears to be an American-based document where it's warning of the effect really on American troops of over-vaccination, putting them at risk. Just think about what that means. And then we have this one. So it's a report of the World Health Organization, Joint Mission on Corona Disease 2019. And the key bit about this is the main statistic that is in the document, that the death rate of people who had contracted severe coronavirus dropped to 0.7%. So this is actually very good news, but of course this type of statistic again is not being reported by the BBC, it's not being reported by the wider newspapers in UK, even though this starts to give a much more balanced, moderate judgment on how any country should deal with the disease. So you've got a web link there if you want to go and have a look at that. Copy that link and do your own research. As I say, we're very confident in the source that's provided this information to us, but as always we say to the public, please go and research what we're saying yourself. Now another animated graph, let's bring this in, see if it works. It should do. But what we're really showing here is that data from China, because it has not been corrected for recoveries, is still skewing data that's being used to ramp up the fear in other countries. So central with the red animation there around the graph, the comment is China is skewing the data at the moment because they have recovered 61,578 cases and only have 16,000 active cases. Now we remind people, if 16,000 active cases sounds a lot, you're dealing with a population of roughly 1.4 billion people. So the overall number of people affected is very, very small. South Korea features with quite a large graph spike of serious cases on the left of the screen, and the comment is South Korea is testing much more than anyone else, i.e. they're looking out for more cases more than other countries. As a result, their percentage of deaths and serious cases are a truer representation of this disease, but it's still pointing out that they're very low. And then the overall comment is the more testing that is done, the less of a problem this disease appears to be. Now remember, this is not comment from UK column, this is comment from fully qualified medical people who are desperate to help get out information about what's really happening. So let's bring in the next one. And what have we got here? Well, this is comparing flu deaths. And the key point is that coronavirus compared to Spanish flu almost doesn't feature. So Spanish flu, when it occurred, had a 2,857% higher death rate than coronavirus, and yet countries like UK were able to survive that, and indeed many other European countries. So this cartoon probably says it all, but nobody wants to talk about the Spanish flu elephant in the room, which proves statistically that what we're being told about coronavirus is nonsense. So key question for our audience today: who in the UK is peddling grossly skewed statistics in order to make the population fearful, and why would they be doing that?
Mainstream media?
Well, they're part of it, but of course the government is at the back of it with the COBRA meetings, etc. But we'll see who out there knows more than we do, and perhaps you'd tell us what's going on. Now, this is some comment from medical experts. So we've got Dr. Tom Jefferson, Oxford University, the world's expert in influenza illness. He says because of his background as an epidemiologist, sorry, I'm having trouble reading the screen there, and a Cochrane researcher, my involvement in the H1N1 outbreak, I often get stopped in the street or a bar or the gym and asked about coronavirus 19. How long do you take to get it? How do I avoid it? His comment is there doesn't seem to be anything special about this particular epidemic of influenza-like illness, and there's a lack of institutional credibility as perceived by my friends. Now, we're going to make it perfectly plain that the information we have received and we are reporting did not come from Dr. Tom Jefferson, but another person valued his comment so much it was sent in to us. And this is another third party whose view is valued and was sent to us. It's Professor Didier Raoult. Now, he's from an organisation connected to, I believe it's Marseille University, which specialises in infectious diseases. And he says that coronavirus can easily be treated with an existing drug, and that this has been confirmed by Chinese scientists. There's a video, we've given you the link at the bottom of your screen, and he's saying that basically we should start talking out about what can be done for people suffering with the virus instead of this fear-mongering towards people dying. So he said this is a bit more. Well, here's a last-minute scoop, a very important news. The Chinese, who are the fastest and who are very pragmatic, instead of looking to develop a new vaccine or a new molecule that could treat the coronavirus, they did what we call repositioning, meaning they tested old molecules that are known and have been used in the past without showing toxic effects to see if they could use some to treat the new coronavirus. They tested them for their new virus and found that it was just as good. And this was a substance called chloroquine, which I believe had been used on the SARS virus. So a lot of positive information. He says it's actually excellent news, but there is a way of treating people and the Chinese are using it. But again, we're not actually talking about it in UK. And his final comment here is that actually, from all respiratory infections, coronavirus is probably the easiest to treat. So there is really no reason to get excited anymore. There's no reason to get excited and rush to produce a vaccine. Now, this is contrary to what certainly the British government and the World Health Organization are saying. And of course, that is being led by the Bill and Melinda Gates rush to develop a vaccine. So we'll leave you with a little We'll leave you with this one, but this is another report of giving medication with success. You can read this yourself, but it's the use of stem cells to treat coronavirus. And if you'd like to get into the references in more detail, this is the website for the Marseille Institute with the web address at the bottom of your screen. And this is one for one of the reports. Now, this is a bona fide scientific publication or site for publications, and it's also supported by a global information analytics business called Elsevier, if I've pronounced that correctly. So we're going to say that the individual that provided us this information is certainly not alone, and they're reporting that a significant number of health professionals in UK and worldwide are asking the same question: why the hype, and why will governments not tell the truth about the real state of coronavirus and the ability of people to cope with it? It's quite remarkable, Mike, isn't it, that we've come a long way, that we've now got professionals like this coming to us saying none of the other media will put this out.
Absolutely. And just to make a comment about what's been going on this morning then, what we're seeing is the implementation of policies that have been announced over the past 2 years. For example, fusion doctrine. We're seeing the coordinated activity between the Bank of England, its internal departments, and government. We're seeing the rapid response mechanism with a common narrative being pushed through the mainstream press, and the suppression of any narrative which questions that common narrative. Yeah. And so we're seeing some really major policies that have been announced in the past 18 months to 2 years being implemented on this, and hiding what seems to be the accuracy of academics and doctors, yes, from the public.
This is the key point. This is not just us speaking or other free news media. This is qualified academics and professionals. So very, very interesting. We'll just say to our audience today, if you follow this through, if you're confident that what we're saying is correct and you value that information, please help spread it, because we know that the covert censorship goes on.
Absolutely. And if you do like what the UK Column does and you'd like to help us out, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community. There are options for doing that there, and your assistance very much needed and appreciated. Now, Brian, excellent news, because as we've just been talking about the mainstream press, the government is running another inquiry into how they can support the future of journalism, because it's such high quality in the UK that it needs to be supported, because nobody's buying it. So this is the House of Lords Communications Digital Committee asking reporters and academics to share their thoughts about journalism, what the challenges are, what the government can do to support the industry in the coming years. And this is following on, of course, from the Cairncross Review. And they're going to be looking at whether the Cairncross Review and the recommendations from that and the government's implementation of those recommendations is sufficient to support the future of mainstream journalism. So they have already taken evidence from people such as Ofcom and the Reuters Institute. And yesterday they were asking the question, which skills should be required to succeed in journalism? So if you want to be a journalist, what skills do you need? Well, Will Gore, who's the head of partnerships and projects at the National Council for the Training of Journalists, was giving evidence. That's on screen at the moment. And then later on, they took evidence from Andy Dickinson, who's a senior lecturer in multimedia journalism at Manchester Metropolitan University. But what's absolutely clear here is that there is an extremely strong concern within the Houses of Parliament that the mainstream news media is not succeeding on a commercial basis. And of course, without that mainstream news media, they can't run their rapid reaction mechanism and their common narratives and their criticism of anybody that is commenting any counter narrative. And so they feel the need to reinforce or to underpin the mainstream press, potentially even by funding it in some way. And this to me just seems like an unbelievably dangerous situation or direction of travel. Because when the mainstream media is reliant on government for its very existence, then there can be no fourth estate.
We're in the Soviet.
Right.
We are in the Soviet when the government controls the media. Let's look at how bad things have got. This is part of a story that we've been following for some time. It's getting deeper and deeper, and of course it involves the BBC. So let's have a look at this BBC outside source audio documentary, and the title was "What's It Like Being the Parent of a Porn Star?" Now this was put out on the 25th of February 2020, and if you're not familiar with BBC outside source, they say it's broadcast live from the BBC newsroom, so this is fully embedded in the BBC, combining your news sources and ours, World Service Radio and BBC World News, and you can contact them. Now I will say straight away, I have contacted them this morning because I'm asking them for comment on what they've been up to here. I haven't had a reply as yet, but we'll see how that goes. But if you go to the main part of BBC outside source, you can find this as header on their Twitter page, and then the key gentleman here is a Mr. Ross Atkins, presenter and creator of at BBC outside source on BBC News, etc., etc. It's very difficult to contact any organisation or any person inside the BBC because they're all protected by a firewall. But what did we get interested in? Well, of course, they had to Twitter out their good works on their own Twitter page. So this is BBC outside source, and here's the image for the mini audio documentary. And if you went under that, there were some extremely interesting replies. And the top one there circled is from Poppy. She says, "Thank you so much for doing this segment. Our industry," and let's remember she's talking about the hardcore porn industry, "our industry truly needs the world to hear how happy we are with our careers and that the stigma behind it isn't needed. Porn isn't this taboo subject anymore. It's a real career we're proud of. I'm blessed to have supportive parents." So this was glowing praise for the BBC from the porn industry, and there was a number of other replies, tweet replies from the porn industry. I've got to be very careful what we put on screen here, but basically any child or youngster following this thread through was linked to absolutely graphic porn. So we're now able to say with total confidence that we can see that the BBC has an agenda. We've asked the BBC to explain why they're so proud to be supporting the porn industry. And of course that porn industry will be helping to talent spot with young people, some of questionable age. But here we can see the real hypocrisy of the BBC, because we'd also picked up on an article by the BBC back in December last year. And this is it: online child sexual abuse. Don't do what I did. Now this is a little video documentary which is basically about somebody who mistakenly viewed child porn and mistakenly circulated it on to other people, which resulted in a police visit to his door. We'll just give you a couple of snapshots from the video, but it starts out with this warning: it's illegal to go online and look for child sexual abuse material, view it, download it, share, distribute, or send it to somebody else. Before I go to the next thing, just remember the Internet Watch Foundation, which the BBC advertises here. We'll come back to that. But the video itself ended with "further help and support is available. Details can be found at BBC Action Line." Now this documentary was principally highly supportive of people watching and mistakenly circulating child abuse pornography. This wasn't protecting the children being abused. This is helping guide people who've been mistaken into getting help. So who produced it? Well, that was shown at the bottom of the screen. Produced and edited by Jamie Ryan, series producer Anissa Subedar, and commissioning editor Kimberly Rowell. Well, as always, UK Column did its research, and my goodness, and I've got to warn you, this is extremely unpleasant, but this is some of the Twitter page of Jamie Ryan. He's there eating, I think many people would say stuffing his face. He says, I do stuff for the BBC. Heads up, expect pics of hand dryers. Interestingly, he seems in the back, Mike, to be poking fun possibly at the Daily Mail. Everything awful, somebody do something. It's a very childish site, but I think you'll be shocked. So this is one of the things. You're probably a dirty streamer, and he's promoting other material talking about dirty streaming. You can make up your own minds about that. This is grossly offensive, so turn away if you're easily offended. But he said that he found he didn't get a job he was after whilst at the Sex Museum. And he's got mixed emotions about that. Remember that this is one of the BBC journalists producing material which is supposedly protecting children, or is it protecting people who've made mistakes? And he goes on to use some pretty vile language in this little video. The F word is used. And here he's proud to tell us that he was quite drunk on Saturday, and he took a picture of a disaster. So this is, I would say, if you wanted to be kind to him, Mike, a pretty immature individual, but also he's got a very dark side to him. But this is what we have to accept from the BBC. So let's follow it on. Here's Kimberly Rowell. Now, a little bit cleaner, but she's clearly proud to be stood next to members of the royal family. Well, fair enough. She's proud to have produced a children's book. She's equally proud to be promoting Sherry Blair as a role model for whoever. But we'll say, okay, fair enough. This one was fascinating because here's Anita Subedar. She's a senior journalist, and what's she interested in? Well, she retweeted somebody saying that Harrison Ford could F-word. Apparently he could do 9 people a day. It's a talent, loving 9 different people in one way. Warren Beatty could only do 6. But this is material worthy of being pushed out to the public by the BBC. But by the same token, she's very upset that somebody had said, well, I was out doing a BBC broadcast, and literally moments before I went on air for BBC Southeast, somebody threw a drink at me and said they didn't like the BBC. So we can see here the cognitive dissonance in this lady's mind, the BBC pushing out the filth, but they don't like the feedback. Now, just before we end this segment, here's the Internet Watch Foundation. I'm going to say, Mike, we're reassured that it is
independent.
Absolutely. We're going to celebrate the fact it's all good news. The trust us, we're independent. And what do they say about themselves? Well, the Internet Watch Foundation is operated by a team of 30 plus staff. You can see our staff structure here. We're accountable to a board of trustees, industry members, stakeholders, governance arrangements, so it's all wonderful. And at the bottom, our status indeed says we are an independent, self-regulatory organisation. And of course, they're supporting the BBC. So here's the independent chair, Andrew Pudifat. And well, he's quite an interesting gentleman. Links to the Ford Foundation and Soros's Open Society. So okay. I'm sure he's a nice man. I'm sure he's doing a good job. But it's just fascinating to know what those links might really be and what gets discussed. And of course, the public doesn't know. Here's the industry vice chairman, Becky Foreman. Becky Foreman is UK Corporate Affairs Director for Microsoft. So that's all good. And I also noticed that where she worked up before, well, she was previously head of government affairs at Microsoft, but prior to that, she worked at Ofcom. And that's of interest to UK Column at the moment because we're asking Ofcom some questions as to its relationship with the BBC. We haven't had an answer as yet. We'll end with the partners, including the European Financial Coalition. So it's good to know that those bankers are looking out for our best interests. But overall, a pretty sick little report on the BBC, and we'll follow through on what the BBC has to say.
Right, now this is the Energy Systems Catapult. For anybody that doesn't know what the catapults are, they are a group of non-governmental organisations, you might call them, that provide advice to government about developing the future of the UK. So this is the Energy Systems Catapult, and they released a report yesterday called Innovating to Net Zero. And it's a fascinating little report because what it basically says is that the government's aims to become net zero by 2050 are not possible unless the British public stops flying, and no more flights, got to stop flying completely, got to stop eating red meat completely, we've got to vastly reduce travel and so on. And they're really saying that it's unlikely that in the present situation that the British public would be willing to do that. So something is going to need to change in order to make people change their minds about their need to use flights, or their need to travel, or their need to eat red meat. So I can't imagine what that would be.
Well, they're going to change as much as they can, Mike. This brings us back to the Behavioural Change Unit, which boasted it could use applied psychology to change the way people behave. It's not working as they want, but they're going to give us more.
But I mean, bearing in mind this organisation is feeding information into government, would it be beyond the realms of possibility that government might rather cynically use some kind of pandemic perhaps to justify causing people to change their behaviour? So we restrict travel, we restrict the eating of red meat, and we restrict many other things that people take for granted in their daily lives on the basis of what's effectively a fake pandemic.
I'm sure they would do that.
Well, just asking the question. And we'll just end with a final coronavirus story here, because the French Ministry of Health pushed this out yesterday on Twitter. And it says, basically, to translate, it says, cocaine does not protect against COVID-19. So the French government felt they needed to push that information out. And I asked the question on Twitter, has this information in fact been sent to the British Parliament? Because of course...
cocaine found on the toilet seats in Westminster.
Absolutely. So I'm not clear. And I also asked, has Public Health England given this information to parliamentarians? Because I'm quite sure that they were probably expecting that cocaine would help. But nonetheless, just wanted to quickly run through a couple of the replies to this particular tweet, because people in France, at least, making, absolutely putting the health ministry in their place. So here is one example, Mr. Macron apparently sniffing. Okay, that makes pretty clear. And here again, well, this is clearly a fake image of Monsieur Macron sniffing something. And Monsieur Macron crying as well, because this is very sad information for him. And then we have... You want to put that one back up again, do you?
No, I don't think we got it on screen, Mike.
Oh, sorry,
We were busy enjoying ourselves and denying other people the opportunity to see the enjoyment.
We better show those. Okay, so there he is, yes, and there he is again, Monsieur Macron, and Monsieur Macron crying, and then we better show the rest of it. Really nobody taking this situation massively seriously, and deservedly so. Yeah,
but very interesting that French people utterly cynical then at the professionalism of their own government, pointing fingers, and we've got this health advice as well, complete and utter nonsense.
Absolute nonsense, yes.
Yeah. Well, we will leave it there. End by saying thank you very much. We've been receiving a lot of emails from people overseas thanking us for what we're doing. We're delighted to have audience in other countries, and we hope you will stay with us. And I'll just say once again, we really would ask people, if you like what we're doing, please circulate it and share it, because it is very evident that the covert censorship on UK columns productions is increasing, and presumably that's because we're a little bit too close to the truth. We'll end there. Thanks very much for joining us. We will be back at the same time on Friday. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.